Sitting discreetly on a worn-out chair in a hospital waiting room, Paul, a black man with salt and pepper hair, seemed almost invisible among the others. Dressed in modest, slightly worn clothes, nothing about his appearance hinted at the immense fortune he possessed. A few meters away from him, lying on a stretcher, was his loyal servant, an elderly woman who had accompanied him for many years. She was fighting an illness that was slowly consuming her, and Paul was there, silent, keeping watch over her. The waiting room was filled with a palpable tension, a mix of anxiety, suffering, and fragile hope. Not far from him, a visibly exhausted woman, dressed in faded and oversized clothes, nervously held her phone to her ear. Her face bore the marks of a hard life, and her eyes, reddened by fatigue and tears, betrayed immense distress. She was calling friends and family, repeatedly pleading for help to fund her cancer treatment. Each conversation was another blow. "I'm sorry. I can't help you." The responses were always the same, tinged with helplessness and indifference. Paul, a silent observer, watched the scene from the corner of his eye. Each word, each sigh, each refusal seemed to resonate deeply within him, awakening painful memories he had long buried. He too had known despair, loneliness, and the crushing feeling of being abandoned by everyone. But he had managed to transform his life, to build an empire away from prying eyes and judgments. Now, he chose to blend into anonymity, preferring simplicity over ostentation. Yet, watching this woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, he felt an irrepressible urge to act. After yet another unsuccessful call, the woman let her phone drop onto her lap, her gaze vacant, crushed by powerlessness. Paul took a deep breath, rose discreetly, and approached her with a slow, almost hesitant gait. In a soft but firm voice, he said, "Ma'am, forgive me for intruding. I overheard your calls. I want to help you. Whatever the cost of your treatment, I'm willing to cover it entirely." The woman jerked her head up, staring at him with suspicion. Her eyes quickly scanned his modest appearance, his simple clothes, his worn shoes. She frowned, unable to believe that a man who looked so humble could offer such help. You want to help me?" she asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Look at yourself. You don't seem like someone who can even help himself, so why give me false hope? Do you really think I'll believe your pretty words?" Paul, though affected by her harsh words, remained calm. He understood that pain and exhaustion were speaking for her. He replied gently, "I understand your skepticism. You have no reason to trust me, especially with everything you're going through. But I assure you, my intentions are sincere. This isn't pity. It's human. No one should have to face this alone." Still wary, the woman shook her head and crossed her arms, her gaze burning with anger and despair. "You don't know anything about me. You don't understand what I'm going through. Everyone has abandoned me, and now you show up, just like that, thinking you can solve my problems? Go away. I don't need your empty promises." Her words were sharp, piercing Paul's heart like daggers. He stood still for a moment, his gaze lowered, before responding in a voice barely above a whisper. "Very well. I don't want to impose anything on you. If you change your mind, I'll be here, ready to listen." Then slowly, he returned to his chair, the weight of rejection heavy on his shoulders. He sat down, hands clasped on his knees, and stared silently at the floor. Behind him, the woman remained motionless, as if struggling with a mix of conflicting emotions, anger, doubt, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. Paul knew he had done all he could. Despite his wealth, despite his power, he had just learned that some wounds could only be healed with time and trust. A few meters away, a man in an elegant suit observed the scene with interest. His polished appearance contrasted with the simplicity of the hospital setting, but he was not there by chance. This man, named Philippe Marceau, was an influential investor in several national companies. Recognizing Paul, whom he had seen in interviews and reports, he immediately understood the situation. Paul was no ordinary man, and Philippe knew that someone like him would not offer help lightly. Intrigued by the tension between Paul and the woman, He decided to intervene. Approaching confidently, he stood before the woman, who timidly looked up at him, wary. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a calm yet authoritative voice. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. It seems to me you're making a mistake by refusing this man's help." The woman, clearly at the end of her rope, frowned. "And who are you to tell me that?" she retorted sharply. Philippe smiled slightly, unfazed. "I'm someone who knows Paul," he replied, his tone respectful. "He is much more than he appears to be. Do you know that this man, who looks so humble, is one of the most influential businessmen in this country?" Philippe's words struck like a thunderbolt. The woman looked at him, incredulous, then cast a hesitant glance at Paul, who remained seated, silent, his eyes lowered. "That's impossible," she murmured. "This man is dressed like a poor person. He can't be wealthy." Philippe nodded gently, his smile becoming more compassionate. "That's precisely what sets him apart," he explained. "Paul has chosen to live simply. His wealth doesn't interest him as much as the good he can do for others. What he's offering you, ma'am, is a rare opportunity. Genuine help, expecting nothing in return." The woman lowered her gaze, her thoughts racing through her mind. She felt the weight of her prejudices pressing down on her, and a mixture of shame and curiosity began to take hold. Philippe gave her one last look before walking away, leaving her alone with her reflections. Hesitant, she turned her attention back to Paul, still seated and motionless. Taking a deep breath, she approached him. "Sir," she said softly, her voice broken by emotion, "I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I was overwhelmed by my situation. You tried to help me, and I responded with nothing but anger and mistrust." Paul slowly raised his head to look at her. His face, marked by sadness and deep weariness, seemed to search for sincerity in her words. "You don't need to apologize," he replied in a low voice. "I understand your pain. But believe me, I'm not seeking anything except to help you." The woman almost knelt before him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why are you doing this? Why would a man like you care about someone like me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Paul stared at the floor for a moment before responding, his voice gentle yet heavy with meaning. "Because no one should have to go through something like this alone. I don't know your story, but I know despair. And if I have the chance to bring a little hope to someone, I will do it, no matter who they are." Paul's words resonated deeply within her. In that moment, she realized there was neither pity nor condescension in his offer, only a genuine desire to make a difference. Even so, she still felt overwhelmed by the shame of her earlier behavior. She wanted to express her gratitude in a way she felt was honest. Leaning forward, she reached out to take his hand, but Paul pulled back slightly, troubled. "Don't touch me," he said softly, almost to himself. "I'm too poor to deserve such a gesture." His words struck her like a blade. She realized that, despite his material wealth, Paul still carried the invisible scars of a difficult past. She remained there, motionless, tears flowing freely. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her sobs. "You're a good man, and I treated you like you were nothing. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're trying to do for me." Paul, moved by her tears and newfound humility, leaned slightly toward her. "It's not me you need to apologize to, ma'am," he said gently. "But if you allow me to help you, then I'll know your regrets are sincere." She nodded, unable to speak, but resolved to accept this unexpected chance. Paul, despite the pain of their initial exchanges, knew he had done the right thing. "It's not that I refuse your gratitude, ma'am. It's just that I prefer to be judged by my actions, not by who I am or what I possess. I wanted to help you because it was the right thing to do, not to receive anything in return." The woman, unsettled by the simplicity and sincerity of his words, felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She lowered her eyes for a moment, reflecting, then finally sat down beside him, her movements calmer and more deliberate. "So what should I do now?" she asked, her voice tinged with deep fatigue, almost resignation. How can I accept this help without fully understanding why you offered it? Paul gave her a sad smile, one filled with humanity and kindness, as if his answer transcended words. You don't have to do anything, he said softly, except accept the help I'm offering. It's up to you how you use it. I don't ask you to understand or to thank me, just to give yourself the chance to get through this. A long silence followed his words. The woman slowly nodded, taking the time to absorb the depth of his response. It was as if, through the simplicity of what he said, he had untangled the knot of anxiety that had weighed on her for weeks. Finally, she let out a sigh that seemed to carry all her pain and relief. Thank you, she said at last, her voice trembling, tears in her eyes. Thank you for giving me this chance, even though I don't believe I deserve what you've offered me. Paul turned to her with an expression of sincere compassion, his eyes reflecting a profound, almost brotherly understanding. We all need a chance, ma'am, he replied with disarming serenity. Sometimes, life gives us the opportunity to show our true nature. Today it was my turn. And I'm glad I could do it for you. Those words resonated within her, like a truth she hadn't been able to hear until now. The two looked at each other in silence, and a moment of peace, fragile but genuine, settled between them. There was no need for more words, only this mutual understanding, this invisible thread that now connected them. In this shared silence, a small ray of sunlight filtered through the window, filling the room with a soft, almost divine light, a gesture from life itself. The woman felt her heart lighten, as if she had found not only support but also a new perspective. Paul, meanwhile, gazed at the ray of light with a contemplative expression, as if he saw in that moment proof of something greater than himself. She took a deep breath, straightened slightly, and added in a steadier voice, "You're right. Maybe life is giving me a second chance, and I won't let it slip away. But tell me, why are you doing all this? You don't even know me." Paul gently turned his gaze toward the window, his smile tinged with a certain melancholy. "Because once, someone did this for me," he finally replied. "And it changed my life. I believe we all have a role to play, to give back what we've received. Today, it was simply your turn." The woman felt her heart tighten. She understood that this man, despite his calm demeanor, carried within him a story, perhaps a pain, that he had transformed into a source of altruism. "Then I promise you I'll do the same," she said with conviction. "I don't know how yet, but I'll pass on what you've given me." Paul turned his head toward her and smiled, this time with a glimmer of hope and trust. "That's all I could hope for," he said simply. They stayed there, side by side, united by an encounter that had moved beyond anonymity and mistrust to become something rarer, a moment of pure humanity. A moment when two souls meet to extend a helping hand, and the world, if only for a moment, seems a little less harsh. Time passed, and with Paul's generous help, Clara was finally able to undergo her surgery. What had once seemed like a dark and uncertain horizon opened to a new light. Days of pain and discouragement turned into weeks of recovery, marked by steady progress. Gradually, Clara regained her health. Her doctors, astonished by her resilience, confirmed that she was completely healed. The news turned her life around, bringing a profound joy and relief she had dared not hope for. In the months that followed, Clara discovered just how much her life had changed. She returned to her activities with renewed energy, and the gratitude she felt for Paul became a driving force. However, a sense of unfinished business lingered in her heart. She knew she couldn't move on without finding the man who had made this new beginning possible. She began by returning to the hospital where they had met, questioning the doctors and nurses. But Paul seemed to have quietly slipped away, leaving no address behind. Clara, however, did not give up. She sifted through her memories of their one conversation, searching for clues. She consulted records, spoke to patients and visitors, and even reached out to local media to broadcast a message. Days turned into weeks, and her tireless efforts eventually bore fruit. She learned that a man matching Paul's description lived in a small, modest house far from the big cities and the bustle of modern life. Intrigued and moved, Clara went to the address provided, holding a carefully chosen bouquet of flowers, a symbol of her gratitude. When she knocked on the door, her heart pounded, caught between hope and apprehension. The door slowly opened, revealing Paul, whose face immediately lit up with surprise and recognition. "Clara," he exclaimed. "What can I do for you?" Clara, her eyes shining with emotion, held out the flowers with a smile. "Sir, I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Because of you, I'm here today, perfectly healthy. You saved my life, and I'll never forget what you did for me." Paul, moved by her gesture, accepted the flowers with a sincere smile. "You don't need to thank me, Clara," he said gently. "You faced this ordeal with remarkable courage. I'm simply glad I could play a small part in your recovery." But Clara insisted, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You did so much more than that, Paul. You gave me hope at a time when everything seemed lost. Your generosity and kindness have left a mark on my life that I can never put into words." Paul invited her inside, and they spent the afternoon talking over cups of tea. Clara listened intently as Paul spoke about his view of life, his values, and his desire to always lend a hand to those in need. She, in turn, shared her story, her struggles, and how his act of kindness had transformed her perception of humanity. This moment of exchange became more than just a thank you. It was a meeting of souls, a deep connection between two people shaped by their experiences yet united by mutual understanding. Clara realized that Paul's help extended far beyond financial support. It was an act of faith in human goodness, an invitation to believe in a world where solidarity and compassion could still exist. Before leaving, Clara made him a promise. "You gave me a new chance at life, Paul. I promise I'll pass on this kindness to others, just as you did for me." Paul, visibly moved, replied with a warm smile. "That's all I could hope for, Clara. Never forget that sometimes, a simple gesture can change a life." They parted on good terms, each enriched by the encounter. Clara returned to her life with newfound strength and serenity. Inspired by Paul's example, she became involved in charitable work, helping those in need and sharing her story to remind others of the importance of selfless kindness. As for Paul, he continued to live humbly, true to his values, always ready to lend a hand to those who crossed his path. And so, their story became a living testament to the power of a generous act, a reminder that the most beautiful expressions of humanity are often found in the simplest yet most sincere gestures. May this lesson inspire all of us to look beyond appearances and to sow seeds of compassion wherever we go.